Hey, listen to this.
Hey, my name is Laura. How can I help you?
Hey, I'd like to book an appointment for tomorrow at 4 p.m., please.
Thanks, Janet. I've just booked you in for 4 p.m. Is there anything else I can help you with?
Not really, that's it. Thank you very much.
Awesome. See you tomorrow.
See ya. So what you heard is what we perceive as a very basic, very simple solution of an AI voice agent appointment setter. It seems simple, right? It seems like you just have a call, you're gonna tell it the time, you're gonna book it into a calendar, and that's done. Unfortunately, this is the reality we face on mostly kind of any corner inside of our business, which means both for AI automation agencies we are working with, as well as for the clients that we have on our side. And today's video is all about appointment setting, but not how you actually do it yourself, but we actually go into something that's even more valuable than that, which is the actual structure behind appointment setting and what things are really important for you to have in an appointment setter, how you can build them, and the difficulties that come along the way. And also for you just to get a really good understanding of that this solution might not be as simple as you actually and initially thought of. So in today's video, I don't have any kind of templates for you, but I have a mirror board with 6 potential solutions, or let's say solutions that gradually brought us to where we are at this point, with a really awesome setup that helped us to close more people for our clients, to qualify them, to book them in calendars in a more optimized and sophisticated way. And I'm going to share all of that with you completely for free. And if you would like to get access to those solutions I'm showing you, or at least the mirror board up for it, simply head over to my resource hub under hub.integraticus.com. You can access all of the images from there with the solution, so you can also see them later and maybe even print them, put them somewhere else where you need them, either for your agency or maybe for your business if you're a client, to get an understanding of what actually happens behind the scenes. Now, I really like to mention that because this video is important for anyone who works or wants to work with voice assistant, meaning that if you are a business owner and you would like to implement an appointment setter or some kind of voice AI that can book appointments, this is incredibly important for you to understand what's actually behind it, so that you get a feeling of why some things are priced in a certain way than others. And obviously, if you're an agency owner and you build your own AI solutions, this one is golden for you, because you will get an actual understanding of what you need to do for building out those kind of appointment setters, because this gives you a picture of the whole utility of all of the features that you should definitely have for building a sophisticated appointment setter that actually does its job right. Now, let's just jump right on the screen. You can see here the solution 1, which obviously is what mostly anyone expects. That also means inside of our agency in the sales calls, we see the same thing. People come to us and say, yeah, we would like to have an appointment setter or a voice AI that can book appointments in a calendar. And usually, once it's there, things go often the wrong way, especially if you don't know how to deal with that. Now we figured it out, luckily, but before we ran into the same kind of issues. And let me just explain, it's all here. So we have a simple, uninformed appointment booking solution. And for considerations, it's none, because obviously it is uninformed, right? And the features, it should just book a meeting into a calendar based on a given date and time. So we have the following flow. You can imagine the caller says something on the phone like, I want to book an appointment tomorrow at 3 p.m. Then we're gonna send a booking request to a voice AI orchestration layer, which in my case, I'm using Vapi, because I think for all of the things I'm going to show you, Vapi is one of the only platforms that is as sophisticated for building out such an incredible, powerful booking system. Yes, there are many platforms out there like Blend, etc. The thing is, they are not as sophisticated with those setups. You can probably build it, but you need to put in a lot of more time and effort to get the same kind of results. That's why Vapi is our go-to and is also in there, because everything we build is basically structured after that. So you get a better understanding of why I have Vapi in there in the first place. All right, that out of the way. In Vapi, you can do tool calls. If you don't know what a tool call is, check out my previous video, probably gonna link it up here. Tool call is nothing else than the AI basically being able to interact with real world things, which might be something like a calendar, which might be a CRM, etc. And then once, let's say, the user says, for example, he would like to make an appointment at this time, then in the orchestration layer, we make a tool call. The tool call basically then books the appointment in the user's calendar and the whole thing is done. That seems like a very basic example, and that's what you heard on my phone, right? This was just a pre-made static example to show you how that usually looks like in a perfect interaction during a conversation with a voice assistant. But the reality is that this is barely ever the case. It's very rare for many reasons, right? So this, what we see here as a solution 1, is usually the uninformed optimism that kicks in with either the client or maybe even you, thinking it is a very easy thing to set up and build out. But then down the line you see, oh yeah, there's actually this thing. Oh, and this also doesn't work. Dang, okay, yeah, now the project definitely gets bigger. I need to rebuild them again for new things. and the whole project just becomes a big mess. So if you follow along what I'm going to show you now, you can avoid all of those things. And I hope it gives you as a business owner as well a better perspective of why some of those things are more expensive than the simple solution that you see here on the screen. Now, solution one is basically, in my opinion, not even a solution. It's more of a concept. It's the way how it works so that people understand it. But this is what we often see as a starting point. So let's just ignore that and don't even call that a solution, because in my opinion, this is literally way too less of what you should ever offer. Now, heading a little bit more to the side here to solution two, you can see that we now actually start with functionality. So all of the new updates that are added to it are marked in purple, and I'm gonna go over them so you understand actually what happens behind the scenes. With functional, I actually mean being able to actually book a functional appointment booking. Because with a solution one like you have seen here, there are a lot of things missing. And even basic things like here, the company time zone differs from the user time zone. The user time zone differs from the company time zone. It can be in both ways, or sometimes you're in both ways together, which we also gonna come to. And here, if the AI has actually the date and time context. Now, if you usually build a voice assistant, it doesn't know the current time. So Vapi, for example, predefines some variables that you can add to your voice assistant with a current timestamp so that the AI at least know on which date and time it's interacting with. This is incredibly important because that helps you to say things like tomorrow at 3 p.m. because tomorrow is not a really valid timestamp if you don't have any reference you can use towards that, right? So by just feeding it some context about the current time in the prompt, so that's something you do with prompt engineering usually, then you have the AI actually understand better which kind of time the user wants to book and can make the changes accordingly. Now for this solution, we solely focus on the feature that we actually book the appointment in the right time zone, because for the first solution, you would just book something and it would maybe even end up in 2023 or even like years of the past. And if it's in years of the past, obviously it's not really helpful. Neither is it if it's booked on a different time slot than the user actually requested. But that is exactly what this kind of thing solves. And to run you over the flow again, we have kind of the same setup. The user says, let's book an appointment tomorrow at 3 p.m. We're gonna do the booking request. It runs to Vapi. And now in Vapi, we basically enrich the prompt that we have with a timestamp of the UTC timestamp. And that's a very important thing. We use the UTC timestamp because from there we can branch out later on with a time zone that we can collect from the user. And this is another very big thing because collecting the time zone in a function is incredibly important because otherwise, how do we know which time zone the user actually calls in from, right? So in a lot of cases, it makes even sense in the prompt engineering to define from where the user is calling in from so that we can use their time zone to set up the appointment properly. This gets incredibly important if you're dealing with a business or your business is about calls through multiple time zones, then this becomes incredibly important. If you work with a single time zone, it is not as critical, but it still is important in a lot of senses, especially if you work with CRMs, etc., where you need to do time zone conversions. But that's enough for time zones. Let me just wrap it up here with the identification. So once we actually have collected the time zone in the tools, we basically validate it depending on whatever format the calendar that you are using requires, and then we are booking the appointment. Great. Now we actually have a solution that can book an appointment at the right date and the right time through a voice assistant. However, you can probably guess by yourself that this is still not sufficient. There are a lot of things that we haven't considered, which brings us to solution number 3, which we are seeing here. So again, a little bit more of context to everything. And I call that one just an enhanced appointment booking solution, which means it not just can book appointments, but it can actually interact with the user and do some extra things. And these extra things are that it can prevent double bookings and bookings on holidays. And holidays, I mean a couple of things. I mean out of office, I mean actual user holidays, I mean country holidays, etc. Those are things you also need to consider, especially if you build an appointment setup for customer support, for example, right? And the double bookings is another big one. So let's go through the flow. Basically, it's all the same like previously. There are just 2 differences here in purple, and there's a one check right here, which is also in purple. Now, let's start with the upper one. Let's start with the lower one, actually. Now, in the validations, we not only validate the time zone, we actually check the calendar in a separate request for a couple of things, which is if it's in the office hours. So is the company open in the time the user tries to book an appointment? Is it in the holiday season? Is there a user available in the first place, right? Or is the calendar available? All of those things need to be considered for you to actually check if there's an availability for the chosen time slot of the user. Then obviously you could have 2 outcomes. One is if the appointment is available that the user requested, awesome. You just book it into their calendar and the thing is set up. You tell the user basically back in the conversation through Vapi 2 calling that the appointment has been booked, everything is set in place, and then the AI can tell the user that everything is good. The user actually expects a call at this time, and that's it. But in case the time slot is not available, we now have another check that basically just tells the user that the preferred time slot is not available and he should probably just try to choose a new time slot. So then the user can start over again and just ask a new time slot that would probably fit into those kind of criteria. Now, there are even a lot of things that you can do in the prompt engineering inside of WAPI itself, meaning that if you have, for example, office hours, you can directly define them in the prompt because you have also the timestamp variable, and you can basically prompt that it should check whether or not the requested time of the user actually fits inside of the office hours. And if it doesn't, then the AI doesn't even need to call the tool to make the validation, but it can already do it on the LLM layer. This is another little trick that you can use for making this thing faster and saving yourself a couple of operations or requests during the whole workflow, and it makes the thing a little bit smoother. But obviously, solution 3 is also not a solution that I would recommend for anyone because it still is tedious for the client if you have really a lot of bookings. Now, if you have a lot of bookings, you can imagine that many of the time slots will be booked and the user has to go through a massive amount of cycles to just find a potential free slot that he can book. And usually what we have seen with actual results, that clients, if they don't get an appointment after the second time they try, they hang up. That's unfortunately the case, but it is what it is, right? So making for us the booking process as smooth as possible is incredibly crucial for having a proper booking rate. Now that brings us to solution number 4, which is a complete appointment booking solution. Now, this one, as you can see, already contains a lot more details, and we basically have everything that we had previously, including a couple of more things. And those couple of more things are that we can now offer alternative appointments if the preferred time slot is not available. And this was a big game changer for us as well in our agency when we implemented it the very first time. Because obviously getting back some potential alternatives makes it easier for the user to choose because we already know which slots are available and the user can choose them, which again limits the cycle to a maximum of 2, maybe 3 in case the user has no availability for any of those. But this again is another case that we would need to see in the future or in one of the other solutions I'm going to show you soon. But let's just go over the workflow and how that actually looks. So we have the exact same workflow just now, that during the validation step and basically after checking the availability, if the chosen or the preferred time of the user is not available, we literally make another request to the calendar and we check a couple of things for an alternative time. And before I dive into those, there's actually mentioned up here that this is a thing that often depends on the budget of the user, as well as the sophistication of the solution itself, meaning how perfectly should this be timed and how big should the scope be of things, like how flexible should it be. Like we have 3 main questions here that I believe are really, really important for you to check, which is how many days or hours upfront should the calendar check for potential free slots, right? So if the user asks for tomorrow at 3 p.m., obviously it doesn't make sense to give them slots for like 5 days in advance in a lot of cases, right? They probably want to have something closer to the actual date that they chose because they obviously have most likely some reason why they would like to have this date. Now, then another thing is minimum buffer upfront, because obviously you don't want the user to call and then have a meeting booked maybe like 10 minutes after if the user isn't even like ready for that, right? There's always things you would like to make a bit more human for your employees to also have some satisfactions inside of the company for making sure your employees are working efficiently and they're not getting surprised with like random meetings in a couple of minutes and then have to go in unprepared and completely lose focus, maybe it doesn't even go that well, etc. And lastly, how many slots should you return? Now, we found in our agency that returning between 3 to 5 slots is more than sufficient. I would probably even go for 3 slots than 5, but this is totally up to you and obviously depends a little bit on your industry. But let's, for example, say the user would like to book it for tomorrow at 3 p.m. What you would do is you would check for tomorrow's available slots and you would return the 3 closest to the current date. Now, saying that sounds very easy, but even that alone involves a lot of logic where you need to validate things. And this also depends on the integrations you use. Let's, for example, say Google Calendar or maybe even Microsoft Calendars or cal.com, whatever that looks like. You always need to find a way that depends on the integration that you use to make this work and return those slots. Very important thing. That's also why I mentioned the budget plays a big role here, because that is something that is very individual based on each client separately. Now, let's for example say we actually found some alternative slots or not, which is also mentioned here in the potential. If there are slots available, awesome. We just return those slots back to the LLM in the tool called result. And then the LLM can recommend those kind of alternative appointments to the user during the conversation, meaning that the user can then choose if any of those calls fit to his schedule. and then he can schedule them, and we run basically through the whole cycle again, and if that one is booked, we can return 3 new ones, etc. If there are no slots given, then we can also just request the user to find a new time, which again brings us to what we had in solution 3 as the standard. The user just tries to find a new time where he would like to have a booking, and then we would run through the exact same thing again. As you can see, there are still some things that are kind of repetitive and that would make it harder, especially if it comes to rebooking, etc. Which is why solution 4 is also not our preferred solution, which brings us to solution 5, which is a even more sophisticated version. And I even have to make my screen a little smaller here so I can fit it. And you can see that now there's one more step up here and a couple of more features. So maybe let's just dive into the features first. This one can offer next possible slots to a caller that wants to book as soon as possible. This is another use case that hasn't been covered from the previous ones, and I've seen that AI or the LLM usually doesn't handle them well if you don't define them. Meaning that, let's for example say, this is actually not right. Let's for example say, I want to book an appointment now. Something like this, right? So we want the user to actually say, I'd like to book an appointment right now in this moment. Then the AI would basically, in a lot of cases, doesn't know what to do because there's no predefined date. So by just instructing it in a certain way that to book an appointment at this and this date, this is something you can do with prompting. Then it can push that towards a certain date on this day when the user wants, or in the moment the user wants to book, and just schedule it ahead. And we do this with a module up here, which I'm going to show you in a second. But let's just go to the last step of the solution 5, which is that we ensure to provide direct available slots without the user running into book notifications for their preferred slot, which is another very important optimizations that makes a lot of sense just to even keep the cycle shorter and to make bookings a lot simpler. Now, what I mean by those, let's maybe start with the last one actually before I dive in the first one, because it's easy to explain. We have this module right here where we can get basically a certain amount of slots from the calendar before the user actually interacts with the AI. So this happens right at the beginning when the call comes in to Vapi. And what we do is the user calls, Vapi basically bootstraps or starts this assistant. Then in this moment, we're gonna access the calendar of that user or that agent that is connected. We're gonna check for the next possible 3 to 5 slots with a buffer time, as you can see here. And the buffer time is usually how much time we would like to give the user before the meeting happens. So let's, for example, say the user would like to book now. If we set it to, let's say 30 minutes, then the first potential slot that we would give back is in 30 minutes and nothing before that. If you set it to an hour, it's gonna probably be in an hour. Now, this is incredibly important for, first of all, to have your employees happy and not overrunning them with quick appointments right at the spot so they can plan. And secondly, you also have the potential of giving the user already predefined slots that they can instantly access if they don't know exactly when to book it themselves, which is another use case that this scenario covers. If the user would like to book ASAP, so literally right in this moment, then the majority of things is done via prompting and via the first couple of slots that we have here. So if the user would like to book straight away, we just recommend, or we just tell the AI to recommend the slots that we have predefined from the calendar, which the AI, by the way, doesn't need to say all the time, but it can recommend them in the moment the user makes a call. This is all stuff you can do literally just with prompt engineering. And with that said, now we already have a solution that is actually sophisticated, that works, that can handle requests better, that covers a lot of the potential issues. Still, it might be not perfect, and this also depends a lot on your industry, the people that are calling, how they interact with the AI, and what they usually want from you. So there are tons of nuances to it, but with a setup like this, you will definitely have a solid setup that you can use for building out a voice assistant, or can come to an agency like ours to help you build those things out in the first place. And lastly, we are heading over to solution number 6, which is more of a black box. And this is something I just wouldn't like to put into a graph because it becomes incredibly complex. And given the fact that there are many different integrations involved, this thing is something that you will always want to custom build and custom estimate for the client that you're onboarding. Now, if we're scrolling down here to those extra elements, you can see that there are a couple of points that stand out in purple, which is first of all multi-agent calendars and round robin. Those are incredibly massive points that we have seen, especially with bigger companies or with agencies that have a set of calendars that they would like to connect. Now let's imagine, for example, this whole setup, what I showed you right here, is optimized for a single calendar use, right? Meaning that all of the calendar connections you have here are connected to a single, let's say Google Calendar as an example. Now imagine you have multiple calendars or a round robin system, meaning that if you use a service like Calendly, for example, allows you to have one booking link, and then Calendly decides by itself when to assign a meeting to which employee, and it kind of tries to spread them out so that everyone has the equal amount of calendar bookings for a given day that can be managed by each of those agents separately. Now, if it comes to automation, building those systems, you need a lot more input. You, for example, need to fetch available calendars from multiple calendars. You need to book them in their respective calendar. And it really gets complex if it comes to this part, because you somehow need to always track out if a meeting is not available or if a slot is not available, and you recommend an alternative, that the AI knows which calendar this slot was connected to or is related to. Because if you don't know that, let's say Ben has an appointment available or a slot available tomorrow at 3, and then the AI basically just recommends it and he says, yeah, 3 is okay, and then the AI doesn't know and it sends for the appointment slot, for example, to Alex, but Alex is booked. You run into a big issue again. Round-robin systems or multi-agent systems involve a lot more complexity that you definitely need to consider while building them out. And obviously, and unfortunately, it always depends on the integration system that you use. So if you use a system that basically handles those calendar requests for you, which might be cal.com or maybe even Calendly in some ways, and I'm going to tell you why I say in some ways only, then use those solutions, use those predefined ones instead of interacting with the calendars directly, at least in the beginning, because building out a system for calendars itself is another very, very complex thing that you need to put in a lot of more time, and you need to make sure that estimates or your expectations for the project are aligned. Now, talking about Calendly, it brings us to the next endpoint, API differences. So if you, for example, would like to implement Calendly to book your calendars, as much as I would like to build a solution for you, I probably have to disappoint you because Calendly is not the way to go for booking appointments. The reason for that is because for some reason that literally is not clear to me at all, they do not have an API endpoint for booking appointments, for scheduling or for creating appointments. It just doesn't exist in their documentation. It's nothing they offer, which really doesn't make sense for me. But because of that, we need to find workarounds. And those workarounds usually look like that we use a Google Calendar, that we just connect directly to the automations instead of going the way through Calendly. As you can imagine, that brings again extra complexities. If you use multi-agents or round-robin systems that are connected to multiple calendars, then this whole thing becomes again more complex. You need to find alternative ways by merging calendars or making them accessible through one, connecting in through that, etc. It's just becoming a lot more complex down the way. So make sure that when you check for a solution and the client says something like Calendly, that you inform them that this is potentially not possible. And you can verify that by just checking the API endpoints and seeing if all of the features can be built with the API integrations that they offer. Now, another thing is prompt engineering itself. Obviously, every single client is different. Every single client has different needs. And there are 100% nuances that makes it incredibly hard to even templatize the setup I've shown you. So you will have nuances in mostly any of those solutions. And prompt engineering is a very big part of that, because prompt engineering allows us to do more nuanced conversation flows during a conversation with the AI assistant while actually having them implemented and in harmony with the whole booking and appointment setting process. Another point on the list is email validations. And as you can imagine, email validations is an incredibly hard thing to do, especially with voice AI, because when the user is on the phone and they try to tell their email to us, in most cases, I would say in the majority of cases, the AI gets the email wrong. And in the end, you cannot really use it. You need to manually listen to the call and have it extracted by a human. It's just something I really don't like. And that's also why I have the next step in here, which is kind of a workaround that we use for some clients. Meaning that if they book a calendar appointment, for example, it is assigned with their phone number. And then with the phone number and the confirmation, we basically request the email from them. Meaning that we can send them an SMS as a confirmation email for the booking, and the SMS then contains an extra link where they can sign in or add their email address, and then it's being added to an actual booking system and they get a real confirmation for the booking again. Now, this is another alternative solution. SMS confirmations are something that we have seen as well with more sophisticated systems. A lot of people would like to just confirm the booking via SMS so that the user at least acknowledges that the meeting actually has been booked. Of course, obviously, if you don't program your AI properly, and for example, the booking part goes wrong and you don't have proper error handling back to the AI might still consider the meeting be booked and tells the user, awesome, yeah, it's booked, even though it isn't. And that's why having a SMS confirmation is incredibly important, because it helps the user as well to understand whether or not the meeting was actually scheduled, so he has some feedback based on whatever he was interacting with. Now, given all of this, I would like to lastly show you a comparison of solution 5 and the actual solution 1, as you can see here. This is the uninformed optimism. This is the probably informed pessimism before going into valley of despair if clients or business owners seeing this solution, because obviously this whole thing is a lot more complex. There are a lot more factors that need to be involved. And because of all of this, obviously the prices we charge for creating those solutions are definitely higher than what we would have to charge for a solution that looks something like this. We can build out something like this, it's not gonna be good, so that's why we just don't do it. We want to make sure that the assistants we are building are actually working and that you have actually a use case that brings you the results you're looking for. Now, with that out of the way, I really hope you can grasp the concept better of what it actually takes of building an appointment booking solution. And there's one more thing I'd like to know from you. Have you ever built any kind of booking solutions like this? Is it something you've done in your agency? Feel free to drop your insights below in the comments. I'm very keen to see what you've struggled with if it comes to those appointment booking setters. And if you'd like to see anything else in the voice AI space, feel free to comment that below as well. Very happy to help you out, make videos about it, so that you can get better in building voice assistants, or you get a better understanding for your very own business. That's all I have to say for now. Thank you very much for watching and see you next time.